Welcome to this People and Purpose video. My name is Eszter Molnar Mills, and it's my pleasure to welcome today Michelle McQuaid, who is the author of The Strengths Blueprint and the founder of the Strengths Challenge. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, Esther. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview with us. Michelle, can I just ask you to do a little bit of an introduction of who you are and kind of the key aspects of your work, please?
Sure. I describe myself as a workplace wellbeing teacher, which simply means that I go into lots of organisations, different sizes, different backgrounds, corporations, government, schools, and I try and fuse together the latest research in positive psychology and neuroscience and give them very small, practical ways that they can start applying these ideas so that they can bring out the best in themselves, but also the people that they're working with and the people they're serving as well.
That sounds fantastic. And I'm fairly familiar with your work around positive psychology, neuroscience, and strengths. But can you tell us a little bit about the importance of those areas of research for the world of work?
Yeah, look, after spending more than a decade in big corporate organizations around the world, one of the things I noticed was that unfortunately a lot of our workplaces aren't well designed for bringing out the best in us. There's a lot of complexity, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of change, and often that creates a lot of fear and anxiety in us. That isn't always the easiest way to use our strengths, to do more of what we do best, to connect well with our colleagues, to really feel aligned with the mission and purpose that might be important to us and that the organisation is trying to achieve. So I became more and more curious about how, given that organisations are the kind of systems that we grow up in, for many of us who spend our careers in them, how could you make that system better? And what could you do at an individual level? What could you do at a team level? And what could you do systemically, top down, to help workplaces bring out the best in their people more? Because, people are such an important resource for our organisations, and I truly believe that it's our workplaces that will help us face into many of the challenges we're facing in the world over the decades that come. So I found that positive psychology, some of the new research in neuroscience, was really helpful at understanding, number one, what was happening to people's brains in all of that complexity and uncertainty, why perhaps that didn't make it easy to be the best people we could be. And number two, how within that as a system could you maybe help people feel more resilient, better able to navigate the highs and lows they're experiencing at work in very small, busy-proof, practical ways. So positive psychology, I think, in particular, offers some great interventions that we can use and some interesting theories to organise our thinking around. One of the global HR leaders I worked with a number of years ago said to me, "This positive psychology stuff is all great, but where's the roadmap for pulling this off?" And that was such a great question and really sent me away researching more and trying to figure that out. The roadmap I found works best for organisations is Professor Martin Seligman's theory of wellbeing and what it takes to help people to more consistently flourish. And so a lot of the work I do in organisations is around what he calls his PERMA model of how we help people experience more heartfelt, positive emotions to boost their resilience, more engagement in their work, how do we help them use their strengths more, to cultivate more genuine and authentic relationships with others, to experience more meaning and purpose in their work, and to have more sense of accomplishment around the things that matter most to them. And again, I found that there are lots of little tested interventions you can use along that roadmap that helps the leader to figure it out. But also, as you touched on, the strength piece in particular, I found for many workplaces is a really easy place to start. Number one, for leaders to figure out the best in themselves, but number two, to help them start to understand how to bring out the best in their teams as well.
That's fantastic. And I think all of the areas that you've just touched on are so critical and actually getting more and more important as um, the business context gets more complex and actually faster changing. So, can you give us some examples of interventions or actions that leaders could take or could encourage their teams to take that will build that well-being, that resilience that you've talked about?
Yeah, look, I think strengths is often the king of the interventions to start with in workplaces. It's a really easy one to access, and the growing body of research on it is pretty overwhelming when you start to look at the benefits. There's a great study a few years ago done by the Corporate Leadership Council around the world who found that when a leader has a performance conversation with an employee and they focus more on the weaknesses, the things that employee needs to fix about themselves, on average they see performance decline for a period of time afterwards by 27%. But when that leader has more of a strengths focus in that conversation about what that employee can build upon, what's working for them, that they can do more of, then for the same period of time, on average, we see performance improve by up to 36%. And that's a massive difference for the sake of a
Absolutely.
conversation. 27% decline in performance or a 36% improvement. So I think strengths is a really easy one. Very simple steps that you can take as a leader. Number one, starting to discover what your strengths are as a leader, but also what your team's strengths are. We see a lot of organisations using strengths assessment tools to make this easier. Probably one of the most popular that I work with is the free VIA survey at viacharacter.org. Takes all of 10 minutes and it gives you some great vocabulary around describing these strengths and what you're actually seeing. But even without a tool, you can discover people's strengths just by starting to tune into those moments where they light up, where they're more engaged and energized and enjoying the work that they're doing. Secondly, then, we see these leaders getting better at giving more real time feedback to people as they're going about their jobs on their strengths. Now, this doesn't mean that they're only saying nice things all the time or that they're only paying attention to what's working and ignoring what's not. Instead, these leaders have figured out that strengths shouldn't be used as blunt instruments. So this isn't just about doing more of what you do best all the time and ignoring everything else. These leaders look at it through the lens of helping you figure out which strengths, how much, and in what situations for what kind of outcomes. So yes, they look for when it's working well, but they also look for where strengths might be being underplayed. So those moments where people are lacking confidence or procrastinating and putting things off, and where they might be being overplayed as well. So those times when an employee might be on the verge of almost burning themselves out because they're going so hard at something, or they're going so hard at something they don't quite realize they're putting other people off around them. So we see this with people overplaying the strength of honesty, for example,
Mm.
where they're just being way too blunt in the way that they're communicating, or people with the strength of humour, making the jokes at the wrong time, or people with the strength of hope, completely overestimating what's realistic for them or other team members to get done. So thinking about this feedback in terms of when it's going well, when it's being underplayed, when it's being overplayed, we find a really easy way for leaders to get far more strengths focused rather than worrying so much about the weaknesses that need addressing. A lot of that improvement can be addressed through this strengths lens. And the third thing they do is then think about the development investments for these people. So that might be on the job learning opportunities. So what kind of work are you giving them that helps them to develop their strengths more? It might be formal training sort of programs that you're putting them in, or coaching and mentoring. Can you match them up perhaps with people who've already developed the next stage of these strengths that they can learn from as they go?
I'm really pleased that you've mentioned this idea of over and underplayed strengths, because I think when we encourage leaders to use a more strength based approach, they often worry that that means that they're no longer allowed, as it were, to have conversations around weakness. And of course, that's not the case.
Not at all. In fact, I think it makes us more intelligent about how we deal with the weaknesses. So, Professor David Cooperrider's research estimates that most workplaces currently spend about 80% of their time focused on fixing weaknesses and only 20% of their time focused on fixing strengths. And his suggestion is that we want to flip this equation. So, let's say we can spend 80% of our time on developing strengths. That doesn't mean ignoring the areas that need improving, but just seeing if we can come through that strengths lens of things that are overplayed or underplayed. But in 20% of cases, you may find that there are genuine weaknesses that pose a real risk to the business that should be addressed head on. The trick, I think, with these weaknesses is just being realistic about the amount of time and energy it really takes to change these behaviours. A weakness is a weakness because someone's brain isn't currently wired to do that behaviour well. And so rewiring our brains takes time, a lot of effort and practice. And so be realistic about the outcome you're likely to get there.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Um, And I think that leads us nicely to the next question around, you mentioned resilience and well-being as some of the key outcomes of taking a more positive approach. Could you just tell us a little bit about how using positive psychology and neuroscience, leaders can build well-being and resilience in their organizations or in their teams?
Yeah, look, I think there's been a lot of discussion in business media over the last 5 years about happier workplaces. And I think happier workplaces are a great thing to have. Don't get me wrong, I think we should have more of it. But I'm actually not sure that that's the goal that we should be shooting for. I think what we want in our workplaces is people who have the skills, the knowledge, the support they need to be able to navigate the natural highs and lows we all experience sometimes as we go about our jobs. And that's what I've found is really helpful working in organisations and embedding some of the practices and ideas of positive psychology. And that's where I think the resilience piece really comes into play. I was fortunate enough to have been taught by Professor Karen Rivich at the University of Pennsylvania when I did my master's there. And Karen trains the US military in how they create psychologically fit soldiers. And so she talks about resilience in a different way than I think we've often thought about it. Often resilience is presented as this idea that we're going to keep bouncing back from challenges, from adversities, from things that don't quite go the way we want them to. And I think that's part of it. But if all we're teaching people to do is constantly bounce back, eventually there's probably only so many times we can bounce before we wear out. Karen talked about resilience as our ability to lean in to situations rather than leaning away from them. And I really like that idea of resilience, being that when I'm faced with a challenge, a difficult conversation, an awkward relationship perhaps, how do I lean into those moments rather than leaning away from them? So when it comes to building more resilience at work, there are a number of ways we're seeing in the research that you can go about helping people to do this. One of them is the work of Professor Barbara Fredrickson, who looks at how heartfelt positivity and heart-straining negativity impacts our resilience over time, and what are the little things that we can do. I was stunned. Some of Professor Daniel Goleman's research suggests that 20 to 30% of business performance is determined by the mood of employees. And yet how many workplaces actually have a mood strategy around how we create this kind of heartfelt positivity in our people more? So that's definitely one of the areas that you can play with. The second, of course, goes to some of the more traditional cognitive behaviour therapy of helping people tune into the stories they're telling about what is possible and what isn't possible as they go about their work, but also the stories we tell about ourselves, about whether we're really good enough, whether we're going to cope if something bad happens, whether we're being harmed by other people as we go about our jobs, and perhaps how those stories hijacked the way we think, feel and act, often without us realising it. So I find helping people become more mindful and tuning into the stories we tell individually and collectively, and gently challenging those to say, well, is this true? Is it the only explanation for what could be going on? Or maybe are there other bits of the puzzle that we've missed? And how do these other equally believable stories maybe help us think, feel and act in ways that might serve us better? And the third piece I love in this area is the work of Professor Carol Dweck on fixed and growth mindsets, and some of those beliefs we have about talent and intelligence, and therefore whether we're cultivating a culture of star performers who are just naturally good at things, and so therefore we only celebrate people's success and outcomes, and that's all we measure in a workplace, which often creates a real fear around failure and a real pain around getting negative feedback or criticism for what that says about us. Or whether we're cultivating cultures of growth mindsets, cultures that value learning rather than just getting it right straight out of the gate, cultures that value processes and how we figure out to do things better rather than just outcomes all the time. And we can see in workplaces when we get this kind of culture going more, tends to support innovation much better because we're willing to take risks and to make mistakes where they need to be made and to learn from them. And I think it encapsulates Edison's famous quote of, "I didn't fail, I just found 10,000 ways the light bulb didn't work."
That's perfect. And I think all of what you have just described is not just really important, but actually really attractive for leaders and managers. They are all outcomes that they're looking for. They are all probably ways of working that they feel to be a really good idea would really like to take more of this approach. So if you were to give 2 or 3 pieces of specific advice as kind of a first step, so if a leader is thinking, these are great ideas, but what do I do, next Monday when I go to work? What would you suggest to them? Where do they start?
I think you start by figuring out when you are bringing out the best in your team already, what are you already doing? Because every workplace is different and every leader is different. So build on your own strengths. You'll already be doing some great things as a leader. It's just that your brain is probably naturally more focused on the things that aren't working so well in your team or in your leadership style than on the things that are. So I would start by just taking a bit of time to tune in when you're feeling truly authentic and effective as a leader. What's going on for you? And when your team's performing really well, what's going on for them? What's making that possible that you're doing? And how can you do just a little bit more of that, even just 5% more of that, to have that consistency and mindfulness of it? I think it's a really great place to start on Monday. Secondly, though, I think it really helps as a leader to get a little bit more curious about how people's brains work and how you can bring out the best in them. And if you're looking for free resources on this, there's a heap at michellemcquaid.com. Lots of little videos and tips from the science, lots of references back to the original research if you want it. And again, I pick 1 or 2 areas that really resonate for you. For me as a leader, it was strengths, and so that's where I started. For you, it might be more the accomplishment or the growth mindset, might be the relationships, it might be creating a better mood in your team. And then finally, I'd start to introduce some of these ideas to your teams. I think it's really important that we make space to play with how we bring out the best in ourselves and others. And certainly for me, when I was first figuring some of this research out, I'd take the ideas into my team and they go, okay, here's another crazy idea she's come up with. But I'd say, look, this is what I'm reading about strengths. This is how we could do it. Are we up for experimenting and seeing if it works? And if it doesn't work, it's cool. We'll drop it. We'll try something else. But I'd love to help each of us do more of what we do best and to do that collectively together. And if you're game, I'd love it if we could try this. And again, that was a great way to get my team to give me some permission as a leader to try out these ideas, for them to come on that journey with me. And together we started to figure out a much better picture of what worked for us.
And what a wonderful way of introducing learning and play into the whole process of while we're talking about encouraging the team to find their best ways of working, and introducing that learning and talking more about strengths, you have started a fantastic initiative last year called the Strengths Challenge. So could you tell us a little bit about what the Strengths Challenge is, what it involves, and what the benefits might be if people wanted to encourage their teams to take part?
I'd love to. So we started the Strengths Challenge last year to help people find little busy-proof ways they could start developing their strengths more at work, no matter what their job description said. So when you come in through the Strengths Challenge, it's a website at strengthschallenge.com. It guides you step by step through discovering your strengths using that free VIA survey and helping you to create just a little 11-minute-a-day strength habit to try for 1 week during the Strengths Challenge. It's on again in February from the 8th to the 12th of February. So you can come in, take the survey, set a little habit, and then for that 1 week, we all try and stick to our habit each day together, share how we're doing, and we rate how well we're going. Best of all, along the way, you've got access online to strengths coaches from around the world. So we can help answer your questions or troubleshoot ways of how do I use a strength like love in my job without getting fired for it? And there's also lots of free tools in there, little training videos and play sheets we put there. So if you're new to the whole world of strengths, if you're trying to figure out where you overplay and underplay them and the like, you'll find everything you need to guide you on that journey. So strengthschallenge.com, and again, it's open now. You could go in and get started, but we'll all be trying to stick to our strengths and develop them for the 8th to the 12th of February.
Excellent. We would certainly encourage. We've done this in our office, and we'd certainly encourage everybody to take part. So, what sort of outcomes are you expecting to see? I know you're doing some follow up at the moment from the last challenge, but what kind of outcomes are you expecting to see from people using their strengths more?
Yeah, so in the first challenge, we did get our baseline. So as people came in, we asked them a few questions about, can you name your strengths? Are you using them in your job? Is your manager talking to you about your strengths? Would you describe yourself as flourishing in the last 6 months at work? To try and get a feel about how do strengths impact our well-being and our performance. What we found was immediately after, so the 1 week after the challenge, we saw an increase of almost 10% in most of those areas. So people were definitely better at naming their strengths. They were definitely better at feeling like they could use them each day as they went about their jobs. But probably most important, we saw an uplift of around about 10% in people feeling more engaged and energised, feeling more confident, and more likely to describe themselves as feeling like they were flourishing as they went about their work. So we're taking 3 months and 6 month measures, so we'll see how long those results actually lasted. But what we're finding is really reflective of the larger body of strengths research, which does suggest, as we touched on earlier, that when we have a chance to do a little more of what we do best each day to use our strengths, we generally see happiness levels come up, depression goes down, people have more energy, they feel more confident as they're going about their job, they're more engaged and productive, and they're more likely to describe themselves as flourishing at work. So what we're finding in this challenge is consistent with a bigger body of research, but we think this is a really small, effective intervention that can be fitted into even the busiest days, no matter what your job description says.
And a fantastic set of outcomes that I think all leaders would love to see in their teams. So it's certainly worth encouraging. That's fantastic. Thank you.
We have quite a number of organisations come in and do it with their teams as well. So if you are a workplace and you're thinking, good, this would be great for my whole team, and we're able to provide back that research on your team as well. So you can actually see for your team what impact did it have. So if you're interested in that, again, on strengthschallenge.com, you can find out how to sign up a team, and we can give you some research insights about what happens for your people as well.
Oh, brilliant. I would really encourage everyone to take up that offer, because it is just such an excellent opportunity of getting potentially fantastic gains for very little effort, actually. So it's great that Michelle, you and your team have put this in place for us.
The only other one is if you're looking for ways to measure your people's well-being at work and to give them some of these little tested positive psychology interventions they can play with, we have just launched a new tool that's called the permasurvey.com. Now that's perma with a H, so PERMAH survey.com. And you can come in here, it's completely free and confidential, and your team can figure out at work how are they doing for their well-being across those different pillars of Martin Seligman's pathways, and then they'll get access to a database of more than 200 tested positive psychology interventions that they can pick and choose from, create their own little tailored wellbeing plan, set some goals around, and then set off and see how they do. And the system will ping them again in a little while to say, hey, come back and tell us what's working for you, measure your wellbeing and see what you might want to do next. So this is another great tool that we're trying to put into people's hands to make it easier to improve wellbeing in our workplaces.
What an excellent resource. Thank you very much for putting that in place again and for sharing that with us.